Chris Hudalla, welcome to Hemp Barons today.
Thank you.
We're awfully lucky to have you. You are really a first line of defense and just a personal hero of mine in terms of leading the hemp and cannabis industries for standards, for ethics, all of the things that you see as the CEO and founder of Pro Verde Laboratories. Tell us about what brought you first to the cannabis space from the world of academia, from whence you came.
Well, when they first legalized medical marijuana in Massachusetts, we realized that there was a significant need for some sort of analytical testing. If you think about anything that we put in or on our body, whether it's toothpaste or topical lotions or foods, they're tested to some level, and it seemed ironic to me that there would be a medical-based product that had no level of testing at all. And so we lobbied our state Department of Public Health to get testing included as part of the program, and we were successful in doing that. And Massachusetts then became one of the first states to regulate testing and to mandate it as part of a medical marijuana testing program. Most states that have come online since that, both with adult use and medical, have included some level of testing as part of those requirements.
And indeed, for the New York cannabinoid hemp regulations, which are, of course, are in a proposed state right now. Thank you so much for allowing us to consult with you as stakeholders and grassroots activists. And we very much advocated, and we'll see when the revised proposed regs come out and start the second comment period, how close we were to getting New York to duplicate the Massachusetts testing guidelines, which was absolutely included in the comments. Let me ask you this too, a related but side note. I often tell folks that ProVerde has the largest database of soil samples and heavy metals in soils data that's been collected thus far. Still a true statement. It was true a couple of years ago.
I don't know anymore. Heavy metal testing has kind of become, as I think we were probably among the first labs that were providing high level elemental analysis using ICP-MS for reporting elements, but now it's pretty standard. And so I don't know if that's true anymore. Most labs are doing some level of that testing that has become part of the framework of most state required testing. And so I have no idea if that's true anymore.
It's a cornucopia out there. It's a revolution. We've got asteroids hitting meteors, and oh my goodness. So let's get right to it. I wanted to lay a foundation here, obviously, but I really want us to focus on some consumer awareness concerns, public health concerns, emerging industry concerns as it relates to Delta 8 and maybe even if we can touch upon it, the Delta 9 THC acetate. But certainly, we're seeing a lot in the news about Delta 8. And just today, in fact, High Times sent a sponsored email to talk about replace this picture of a joint with this two pictures of a tablets, which were Delta 8. So it's coming up more and more. Let's talk a bit from the perspective of the hemp revolution and the fact that gloriously, of course, the US Congress in 2018 passed the Farm Bill, which removed hemp and all of its parts. Extracts, derivatives, compounds, cannabinoids, and as you have so astutely pointed out, isomers and salts of isomers. Removed them all from the Controlled Substances Act. Everything is an legal agricultural commodity now. And we've got these 30 isomers of tetrahydrocannabinol. For the audience, we of course have just been saying THC for all these years, and everyone kind of knew what we were talking about. We were talking about Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, and the intoxicating or most talked about intoxicating cannabinoid in the hemp plant. But the reality is, and as is defined in the Controlled Substances Act, there are multiple tetrahydrocannabinols with an S, 30 isomers of THC. And we're starting to see Delta 8, I won't say derived from the hemp plant, and we're going to let Chris elaborate on why I'm not going to say that, but converted from cannabinoids in a hemp plant starting to enter the market and folks discussing an intoxicating effect from them. Of course, hemp was not legalized for intoxication. That's what the medical and adult use market is for. Take it from there, Chris. Let's hear about you being a first line of defense for really informing folks about your concerns regarding Delta 8.
Sure. When you look at the language of legislation or regulation or the Farm Bill, oftentimes we don't know what we don't know. And so at the time that those documents or legislation were created, we didn't really know where the future was going to bring us. And so I have to think that when they crafted that language, when they talked about isomers, I have to think that they were talking about naturally occurring isomers of THC. Delta 9, Delta 8 THC has been observed at trace levels in some plant material. And so they wanted to permit that Delta 8 as being part of that. And so that's where the isomer language came in for. What I don't believe they meant is synthetic isomers of unknown toxicity or efficacy. So, back when they were writing these documents, the people who were charged with writing the regulations and legislation didn't have much knowledge of delta 10 THC or delta 6A10A THC. And so they weren't really thinking about that. When you think of these isomers, they are not naturally occurring. So, of the 30 isomers of THC, the plant produces primarily a single delta 9. There's actually four different delta 9 THC isomers. So, there's four of them, but the plant only produces one. So, of these 30 isomers, delta 9 THC is the only one that's produced in any significant quantity. Delta 8 is seen in trace levels in some uh, plant material, and that's even theorized to not being produced by the plant, but rather due to degradation of the delta 9 THC that the plant produced. But so let's assume that that delta 8 is a natural product. It's the product of natural processes that happen in the environment during cultivation. The other 28 isomers are not natural to cannabis. They're not part of natural processes. So when we see people converting CBD or even delta 9 THC into delta 8, they are non directed syntheses. They oftentimes use acids, metal catalysts, normal organic solvents, things that you would see in a pharmaceutical synthetic lab. And so these are being created synthetically. And because they are non directed, they're non specific, you can't just take CBD and convert it into delta 8. You convert it into lots of the THC isomers, and you get a whole mixture of these isomers in these delta 8 products. Again, the most important thing is that 28 of these isomers have not been studied to any extent, nothing that I can find, on efficacy and more importantly, toxicity. And so we are dosing a population unknowingly. They think it's derived from the plant. These delta 8 products are derived from hemp the same way that methamphetamine is derived from cold medicine. You can buy cold medicine over the counter and you can convert it to methamphetamine, and it doesn't make it legal. So, in that sense, it is derived from cold medicine. Delta 8 is derived from CBD from the hemp plant. And so some people say, well, it's just a derivative. It's still an unnatural product.
And thank you so much for all of that. And here's the interesting debate that I find myself getting into with folks, spirited and otherwise, on this ex- is the real true definition of synthetic and how the Drug Enforcement Administration deals with synthetic, how the Food and Drug Administration deals with synthetic. And more to the point is this debate where folks are telling me, listen, this is not a chemically synthesized product. This process. This is the type of hair splitting in the conversations and debates that I'm having where folks are saying It's a passive process. If we're not creating these things entirely from chemicals in a petri dish, the way, let's say, K2 or spice type of synthetic cannabinoid is created, rather, it's more of a passive process where, exactly as you say, we're taking CBD, adding an acid to it to acidify the CBD, essentially distill it for a few days, and then filter it over clay and carbon as a passive process. The acidification takes place, not the same thing as adding a chemical constituent onto a molecule, which would be chemical synthesis. By the way, I'm not so sure that either way this falls, it splits the hair that makes any point when we're still talking about a public health concern in human toxicity studies. But so that I could either win or somehow take more control in those debates, what is that hair splitting conversation that I'm getting into? I'm the law and policy girl. You're the chemist. How can I say actually it is chemically synthesized? The debate is no, it's passive, not chemical synthesis. Is it or isn't it?
So put a drop of concentrated sulfuric acid in your eye and tell me how passive it is.
Amen. If it's as easy as that, that I can remember.
It's
Okay.
as easy as that. It's a concentrated sulfuric acid, concentrated nitric. These acids that they're using to the conversion, and plus nobody's testing for residuals of these processing solvents or components for finished products. But it is not passive. Passive to me means if you allow it to go the natural processes, it will get there. These isomers that are created during these processes have not been observed in nature. They're not naturally occurring. They have no choice then to be anything but synthetic. They were created by man's intervention or interaction with these. Just because you use CBD as a starting material doesn't make the resulting Delta 8 a natural product.
That's the story that I'm sticking to, and I don't even mean to diminish it by saying story. That's the science, that I'm sticking to in this, because we cannot go from hysterical prohibition to responsibly stewarding these emerging industries if we are immediately going to start creating intoxicating products from a plant that is meant to serve a wide spectrum of industries, none of which are to create intoxication. And the other end of that, and there are lots of reasons why, but the other end of that too, Chris, as you well know, is, for all of these decades during prohibition, hemp and all other forms of cannabis, adult medical use, sacramental, we're all fighting the same fight. But as soon as legalization and regulation starts in, all of the sudden it's a fascinating evolution where there seems to be some overlapping interests. And the last thing that we want is to create anything other than coalition building with the interest for the legal adult use and medical market. And for hemp to basically have access to the entire universe right now. And by the way, that is not to not acknowledge the fact that we are waiting for the FDA to create a regulatory framework for CBD as dietary supplements and food, obviously. But let's just be real. Compared on a federal level, comparing the hemp industries and all that we have access to now versus the medical and adult use, which on a federal level has none of these rights. We're not only encroaching on the interests of those markets, but we are also jeopardizing our own, which is we want to prove to lawmakers, regulators, law enforcement, citizens of concern who are trying to dig their way out of all of these decades of hysterical prohibition, that hemp doesn't get you high. And yet here we're seeing people experiencing intoxicating effects from these uh, synthesized Delta 8 products. What do you say about that?
Well, yeah, it's a challenging topic. I mean, I'm not technically opposed to Delta 8. Delta 8 has been shown to have great efficacy. There's been a significant amount of research. I think I saw a paper from Raphael Mishulam from back in the 60s already looking at and studying it for efficacy. The problem I have, and this is the problem I have with lawyers, is we get into this discussion about Delta 8, whether it's legal or not. My position is not that the Delta 8 it's illegal or legal. It's that these other components that are often resulting in the processes that are being given to consumers, we are dosing them with unknowns. And to me, there has to be a certain amount of liability associated with that. And I think that's going to be damaging to the industry.
Absolutely, and, to say, that I don't support Delta 8 would not be correct at all, and in fact, I was looking at the amount of research that there is out there in our own National Institutes of Health, which include, of course, Dr. Meshulam's, research and others, tremendous, benefits. The issue is, what is its intended purpose for consumption? And if the intended purpose for consumption are those wellness or health benefits, wonderful. If the intended purpose for consumption is intoxication, as a industry leader stewarding the hemp industries for going on, actually it was 30 years last month, um, I that's not where I'm not happy to see that. I'm not happy to see folks getting intoxicated on hemp products. So I think it's going to be an interesting unfolding here
Yep.
of how this is going to go. Any predictions?
Well, so let me just back up. I'm not against intoxication in any way. Again, my concern is for safety. I think when um, consumers are being led to believe that this is naturally extracted from the plant, they're being told and sold a product that is a natural extract of the plant, and it couldn't be further from the truth. I think when FDA, DEA, become increasingly aware, and it amazes me that they haven't done anything yet because these products are all over the marketplace. There is a legitimate pathway for synthesis and production of Delta 8 products. I just haven't seen it come through our lab. We've tested close to 2,000 samples. And in 2,000 samples, I have not seen one yet that I would consider a Delta 8 that would be appropriate for dosing humans. And I think when the FDA, DEA, somebody's going to step in when they see the bulk or the wealth of the data that's out there in the terms of the market size and how many consumers are being dosed with these unknown products. I have to think that they're going to step in and uh, put the kibosh on it. And I hate to see that happen. It's just that the industry is moving too fast for its own good, and it's producing products that haven't been researched. They haven't been well developed. These things are being produced in people's garages sometimes, and that they're just not safe. And they're gonna ruin it for the people who are trying to do it the right way, who are taking the appropriate protocols in synthesis and production.
Indeed, and potentially, begin, as I say, to jeopardize the markets that are absolutely in the bailiwick of hemp. And I think it's wonderful that you make your position so clear. Hopefully, my listeners know that I am the last person opposed to intoxication. I consume adult use and medical cannabis daily and have since I'm 18 years old. And I think that that's what those markets, for your medical needs and for your either relaxation, spiritual, or escape needs, those are the markets for that. Again, my opinion as a decades long hemp industry leader is I don't want to see people getting intoxicated from anything related to the hemp plant. That isn't what hemp is for. Feel free to avail yourself of the medical, adult use, and sacramental markets, and if it's not legal where you are, work real hard to make it legal or move to a state where it's legal. Those are your choices. That's kind of, where I am about it. Now, I don't want us to move into, I guess, what I would call fear mongering, because, of course, there are isomers out there for any number of chemicals and plants and substances where a disaster is not going to happen once it moves into the body. Obviously, you're a chemist, a PhD who can study how these chemicals look from a lab perspective, and then there are those who are researched and trained in how these chemicals react and behave once they're inside a body. But in your presentations, which are fantastic, you use the example of the thalidomide tragedy of the 1950s just as a cautionary tale, sort of a, I would say, almost an extreme example, but an example nonetheless to sort of get folks attention. Will you explain what the thalidomide tragedy of the 1950s is, and just where you see that analogous connection?
Sure. Thalidomide was a drug that was developed in the late 50s. THC, as I said before, had 30 structures or 30 isomers. Thalidomide only has two. And in development of the drug and studying the drug, one of the isomers, I'll call it the right handed structure, they found that it was very good at treating nausea. The left handed structure was mutagenic, it caused horrific birth defects. And so the researchers understood this. Like the conversion of CBD to THC, when they synthesize thalidomide, they make both a mixture of the right and the left, so a mixture of the good and the bad. And they knew enough to separate them, so they separated out the bad so that they were only producing medicine that was pharmaceutically available to consumers. That was the right handed good version. Because of how good it was for nausea, they marketed it to for morning sickness. So a lot of pregnant women were taking thalidomide to help with morning sickness. What the researchers didn't know back in the late 50s is that thalidomide, even the right handed structure, when put in a biological environment, it would go back to its equilibrium concentration of the right and the left. It wasn't happy being pure. I try and use the example of carrying two 20-gallon buckets. You know, you put one in the right hand, one in the left hand, because it's easier than carrying them all in the right hand. So if you have a drug that's all in the right handed, or at least thalidomide, was not happy and went to its equilibrium concentration of left and right. And because that happened in the body, there were horrific birth defects and deaths. And I use that as an example to show that even though the structures are almost identical, they have the same connectivity, they're just arranged slightly different, that can have serious implications. My concern is that of these 28 unknown, unstudied isomers of THC, we don't know what they do in the human body. And that's, I think it would be fascinating or exciting to have Delta 10 THC gummies. But before giving them to masses of population, I want some safety studies on Delta 10 THC. I want to see some data.
Boy, do we ever agree on that. And and to the extent there are delta 8 products out there that can be converted from CBD or delta 9, as it were, that are proven safe. And by the way, proven safe not necessarily to whatever standard the FDA, I suppose, is moving forward with CBD. I often state the article that Martin Lee recently wrote, which is Desperately Seeking Harm, Diagnosing the FDA's CBD Problem. So, the industry itself has moved forward with self grass, with all manner of research. We have research all around the world that makes us feel confident in the safety in terms of not causing liver toxicity, which, of course, was the big thing to look out for, as initial research showed from cannabidiol. So when I say proven that it is safe, I mean to a coalition of industry leaders who are properly trained. I'd love to see that, to the extent, again, that they don't cause intoxication. Delta 8 and every natural constituent of the cannabis plant, no matter whether it's whatever form of cannabis it's coming from, Congress intended to be liberated. Have worked the vast majority of my life to see it liberated, and I want all of those natural plant constituents to be realized to their full potential and deliver on the full promise of that plant. We just need to do it in a way that is safe, and we need to do it in a way that does not jeopardize these emerging industries on the fresh out of prohibition. Just so important. I didn't know if you saw recently, both Bloomberg and Rolling Stone had articles about Delta 8, and I found the Rolling Stone article, and those are both in January 18th and 24th, respectively. The Rolling Stone article interviewed an attorney, and from the Normal Legal Committee. And I often have found, Normal, I have such a deep reverence for, such the heroes, and heroines for all of these decades leading the fight, when it wasn't popular to do so. And also, I find that every now and again there is this divergence of interests, even through that organization. But this particular Normal lawyer was, basically saying in this Rolling Stone article, is quoted as saying that the Department of Justice and the Drug Enforcement Administration are aware of this sort of Delta 8 scourge. I'm using that word, the lawyer did not, but, and it seemed to imply that there would be some imminent activity. And, I have to say that I was just like, wow, in what universe do those of us who have been activists, so dedicated, particularly for decades, all of a sudden are looking to the Department of Justice and the Drug Enforcement Administration to come in and be the hero here, and just so weird and counterintuitive, and not at all where my heart or my head is at. But yet, to the extent it is true that there was some knowledge there of by that quoted attorney. It'll be interesting to see what the DEA, or DOJ, one and the same essentially, has up its sleeve on how they think they are going to handle the Delta 8 situation. Any particular cautionary tales or interesting things that you've seen in the lab, or policies that you have in the lab that you might share with us around Delta 8?
Sure. I think about, I made a comment earlier about how producers are making new products and new formats, and they're moving so fast that we don't have time to evaluate the safety and efficacy of these. And I'll use as an example a vape pen, and somebody thought it would be a great idea to add vitamin E acetate to it. Vitamin E is great. It's great as a vitamin. It's great on your skin. It probably just shouldn't be inhaled. And I think the jury's still out on that one, whether it was actually the vitamin E acetate. But whatever happened with that, it could also be the vape hardware. I've seen some conflicting studies, but we created products, not me, but the industry created products which were not only unsafe, they were deadly. And I don't think anybody did it maliciously. I honestly don't believe there was any malintent there, but people moved too fast and they created a lot of product and put it on the market without thinking, and they put deadly product and people died as a result of that. And so when I think of the Delta 8 scenario, I think of, a repeat of that whole scenario. How many times are we going to put stuff on the market without understanding it, only to realize that the consumers who are trusting us, they're trusting us as producers, they're trusting us as industry representatives to ensure their safety. Um, and they're being put in harm's way because some people aren't doing a good job. There's most of the people in the industry are doing a great job, but it only takes a few people who are not doing a good job that are going to tarnish the industry. If you think of the vitamin E acetate, think about all of the prohibition of vape cartridges in Massachusetts, where I live. Vape cartridges were prohibited by the governor. Um, that only made black market sales go through the roof. And black market sales were even more heavily contaminated. The ones that were regulated, produced, were tested. But there was a bit of an overreaction on that, and I just fear that that's the same thing is going to happen with the Delta 8 phenomena.
Indeed, time will tell, and it may tell fairly swiftly here. I also wanted to go back, when we were talking about the definition of hemp. We talked about the definition of tetrahydrocannabinols, which was amended as a result of the 2018 Farm Bill, and that's a show in itself, as you well know, from the DEA interim final rule, because we're specifically talking about Delta 9, in terms of the DEA interim final rule saying, hey, we think we're going to go ahead and take jurisdiction, even though it's not really our jurisdiction for anything that's over 0.3% Delta 9. And we'll see how that unfolds. The definition of hemp, however, and you'd mentioned it before, the fact that uh, the words isomers and salts of isomers are included in that definition. And when I had first consulted you, um, And I believe we first started talking about this because I needed your consultation for the public comments being submitted for the New York cannabinoid hemp regulations. And again, thank you. Your time is so valuable, brother, and you gave of it generously. And thank you so much for that. And in that conversation, you discussed those words, and I thought to myself, huh, now that he mentions it, I don't think those words were in the original definition. I think he's right. And of course I looked, and even though the original definition of marijuana, which was taken part and parcel right down to the punctuation from the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act adopted by the Nixon administration in 1970 for the Controlled Substances Act, but it included, of course, all of these things, compounds, all of these words, but it did not include isomers and salts of isomers. And so after that conversation, I went on a deep dive. Who, what, how did those words get in there and why? And so I started looking at the Controlled Substances Act and the various bodies of law regarding it and regulation, I should say, the statute itself, and then the body of regulation from it. And I found that while the word isomers, salts of isomers, are not in the actual specific definitions, as it turns out, and you may very well know this, brother, um, the various categories of drugs within the different schedules have their own sort of sub definition. For example, if we look at Schedule One, opiates, there's a little section there that says opiates, unless specifically accepted or unless listed in another schedule. Any of the following opiates, including their isomers, esters, ethers, salts, and salts of isomers, esters, and ethers, whenever the existence of such isomers, esters, ethers, and salts is possible within the specific chemical designation. So, and then for each different classification it talks about the different types of isomers, which I further found fascinating. I've gotten, quite a crash course here, enough to make myself dangerous, but at least try to help the industry, think about these things and move our way forward into responsible stewardship, which of course is the shared goal. So I realized, and the same thing for hallucinogenic substances, under which marijuana and tetrahydrocannabinols is defined. Side note, in that particular category, they include the most categories of isomers. So, as usual, I mean, my mind is always trained to be like, why are they picking on forms of cannabis more than they're picking on anything else? But for cannabis, as it turns out, they include every type of isomer. In fact, they say within that same section for hallucinogenic substances, that for purposes of this paragraph only, the term isomer includes optical, position, and geometric isomers. And we won't get too far in the weeds here because then I had to figure out what position isomers were. And apparently there's some guidance that the DEA has out on that. But the bottom line is that's, it was the architects of the Farm Bill which learned such an important lesson from the definition from 2014, which of course we all thought was going to do the trick. Any part of the plant is any part of the plant. But the DEA, of course, found a way to say any part of the plant surely does not mean any part of the plant. It doesn't mean this, that, and the other thing. So I think that the architects got their best law and policy analysts on it and said, how can we make sure 10 ways from Sunday that there is no iota, not an atom of this plant that the DEA can have jurisdiction over. And I think that's where they found those darn words, isomers and salts of isomers, by going through that deep dive, and they threw it in, and they were very effective. But here we sit today with the freedom and liberation of all of those isomers, and then figuring out how to responsibly steward our ability to use them or work with them.
Yeah. So when you think about traditional pharmaceutical drug development pathways, when they develop a drug, they do studies, they do safety studies, and they market it, and it works great. But they're continually working on that drug. They're adding different side chains or different molecules or variations of that, trying to improve the efficacy, reduce the side effects, and so they're always modifying these. So I don't think this will be any different with cannabis or with THC. Yeah, we talked earlier about THC acetate. there are chemical modifications that can be made to the THC molecule that could have dramatic improvement in different properties, different efficacy. You could have a THC that's reduced in psychoactivity. Look at the delta 8 is already somewhat in that regard, but as researchers do this, it's being studied, but also from a safety standpoint. And I think that there is a real pathway for that for creative studies of the cannabinoid molecules, especially the minor cannabinoids. The If you look at CBC or some of the other minors that are found in hemp as well, um, there's significant promise for different therapeutics from that, and I think we'll see a lot more of that in the future.
Indeed. And therein lies the point of liberating the plant. And I think before too long, we'll liberate the plant entirely with probably some pretty heavy guardrails and for a while, indeed. Now, folks, of course, can go right to our site at podCONX, PODCNX, to access the outstanding presentation that you're using to bring awareness of public health, consumer safety, and just responsible stewardship again to this issue. And all of your other links will be there as well for Pro Verde Laboratories based in Massachusetts. But before we go, Chris, have I not asked you something, or is there anything that you want to make sure that the listeners know before we end this fantastic interview? And thank you again.
Nope, I think you've done a good job at highlighting some of the issues and challenging me with questions. I think I'm good.
Excellent. Well, I cannot thank you enough, not just for your time and again, the generous sharing of your knowledge and expertise, but for really being a first line of defense, for being a trusted, accredited lab. And again, not just ISO accreditations, but being accredited to perform testing, specific types of testing on specific types of products. All of that goes into account when you send your samples to a lab. Bear in mind, folks, that most states and certainly the federal government and all responsible agencies usually have a term defined called accredited labs. So we're seeing a lot of moving. Lab samples over to labs that don't have any accreditation to either perform heavy metals testing, or maybe they have accreditation to perform heavy metals testing, but not necessarily on a Parmesan crisp. So all of those things need to come into account. And thank you for being that lab among very few who have so many accreditations and so much expertise. Chris, thank you for being with us. We can't wait to have you on again, and stay healthy.
Joy, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.